Dear students, good morning. This is class for March 30th, 2020, Asia e Africa 1. I have a couple of things to tell you, to say to you, so I will say them in Italian first and then in English for the Erasmus students. Ho ricevuto una comunicazione riguardante i madrelingua, i CEL. Se voi andrete dopo alla mia pagina Moodle, troverete un link con la relativa password che riguarda i vostri lettori, quindi andrete su questo link, c'è la piattaforma Moodle per i lettori in generale. Anzi, in realtà dovrei chiedere conferma perché potrebbe essere solamente per CP e non per Asia e Africa, quindi nell'eventualità che dovesse funzionare anche per voi, perché è una comunicazione che mi è arrivata dal Dipartimento di Comparate, nell'eventualità che dovesse essere anche per voi, potete andare sul mio Moodle, prendete il link, accedete con la password che vi viene indicato e lì troverete gli esercizi. Altrimenti seguite le regole, seguite le istruzioni che sono state date dai vostri lettori di Asia e Africa, dai vostri CEL di Asia e Africa. So switching to English, what I was saying is that if you go to my Moodle, to my online platform, you can find a link and a password for your mother tongue teachers, the so-called CEL in Italian. I have to double check this information because it could be only for Lingue e Letterature Comparate and not for your course, but I want to double check, and it could be also for your mother tongue teachers. If it's not for your mother tongue teachers, I will expressly say it. I will expressly write it on the platform, and so you will just keep going with your own mother tongue teachers and follow their indications, their instructions for the exam. With that said, anything else? I don't think so. I highly appreciated your comments about the links. Somebody told me that, yes, the links, the further references that I give you about videos slows down your understanding of the video, of the classes, and I definitely get that. I do understand that. I just want to reassure you that this amount of links is only related to the first part, the A part of your course, which is almost done. I think I'm going to finish it within this week. So please just bear with me and watch the videos if you can. Again, they are just an integration to what your textbook is saying, what your textbook is about. There will definitely be fewer cases, fewer videos to watch in section B, which is what we will do in April. But I really thank you for your comments anyway. So last week we worked on vocabulary, and we looked at how new words, new idioms are formed in these new varieties of English. We looked at words that are coined locally, okay, by adding a prefix or a suffix to a word, like stingco in colloquial Singapore English, that means smelly, and it comes from sting plus the application of a suffix, co. Then we looked at compounding, that comes from two English items, usually, that tries to recreate a local concept. For instance, dry coffee, that in East African English means coffee without milk and sugar. Or a high hat, that in Philippine English means a snob. Borrowings from indigenous language. Of course, in these several varieties of English, there can be words that come from the local languages that are brought into English, into their variety of English. Some examples can come from East African English that uses duka for shop, or Indian English that uses Swadeshi for indigenous, native, or Philippine English with kundiman, that means love song. And we watched some videos especially what these last videos have in common is the idea of no longer talking about saying something right or saying something wrong, okay? Because these varieties of English do have some structure, do have some patterns and rules that they follow. We also looked at idioms, okay? So no longer just single words, but how idiomatic expressions are used in these varieties of English. So we looked at some cases where idioms are direct translations from indigenous idioms, like to shake legs, that comes from the Malay idiom goyang kaki, to be idle, or other forms of idioms that are based on native speaker English, sorry. Like to be on a tarmac, that means to be in the process of looking for a new job. Or other cases where English is combined with indigenous forms. A good example for this was the Nigerian to put sand in someone's gari. That means that you threaten someone's livelihood, because gari is a type of flour that is fundamental for Nigerian culture. Sorry, what happened here? Give me a second, let me get back to you. Somebody asked me further information about discourse style. I will try to make it easier for you, okay? Consider that more than a style, let's call to understand the difference between discourse style in these varieties, consider that post-colonial Englishes, the so-called new Englishes, are definitely more formal than inner circle Englishes. What does this mean? If you had to compare a letter from an Indian English speaker and an American English speaker, you will realize that Indian English is definitely more formal. The first thing that you will notice is that their letters always start with dear sir or madame. They are never going to address you using something different. You are sir or madame. And that usually doesn't happen in a typical American English letter. Okay. Plus, where British English uses the form can or will, an Indian English speaker would use could or would. This means that if an American speaker would say, we hope that you, we hope that you can join us, an Indian speaker will be more formal, more polite, and say, we hope that you could join us. Okay? That is something that you would see in, let's say, an Indian speaker English. There's also this other case from Chinese English that says, I am bubbling with zeal and enthusiasm to serve as a research assistant. This is way too formal or way too, let's say, colorful compared to a British or an American English speaker. That would definitely not say that they are bubbling with zeal and enthusiasm to serve as a research assistant, but something way easier than that and less formal. Okay. Forget about what you see here, okay? I'll just delete it. I don't remember what it was, honestly, I don't remember what it was referring to. But whatever, what I wanted to say about this discourse style is just remember that post-colonial Englishes are more formal, okay, than an inner circle English. Then in this other part, what was it? 8.5, we were looking at more specifically at the difference between Pidgin and Creoles. Okay, we looked at Leith's theory about 3 types of English colonies, where In some cases, like America and Australia, the first language speakers of English, basically the British people, displaced the pre-colonial population. We all know what happened to native speakers of English, well, Native Americans. In other cases, for instance, in Nigeria, the pre-colonial population was put into slavery, or subjection at least, and only a part of them was allowed to learn English as a second or additional language. And finally, in cases like the Caribbeans, the pre-colonial population was totally replaced by new workforce that came from West Africa, the slaves from West Africa. Okay, so this definitely had an influence on language. I also showed you the difference between Pidgin and Creole, where Pidgin is a language that has no native speakers. It is born because of the contact between two populations that couldn't understand each other. Okay, so they sort of created this contact language that was a mix of the two languages, or something that was completely different. Whereas a Creole is a pidgin that has that is the first language of a new generation of speakers. What does this mean? A language that was born as a pidgin. These people have children, and they create a language that is the first language, the mother tongue language for their children. In some cases, there is the event of a decreolization. What does this mean? That a Creole, so a first generation, that was first, second, third generations that speak a pidgin, come into extensive contact with a dominant language. And this is what happened with African American Vernacular English, AAVE, also known as Ebonics, that is highly stigmatized in the United States, where it is considered a broken English, an incorrect English. But what linguists and teachers are trying to do now is to get these children into code switching, into recognizing that African American English vernacular English can be spoken in some circuits, in some contexts, but they also have to learn, let's say, an inner circle English, American English. And they have to recognize when to use which. We also looked at what is happening in Great Britain, where there is a multicultural English, or a multicultural London English, also known as Jafaican, where the new generations, especially millennials, are using something that is no longer standard British English, but has lots in common with all the other cultures, all the other populations that live in London. And so it's getting a little bit of everything from these cultures, even if they do not recognize it as a different type of English. Then we looked at the definition. Sorry if I'm getting a little too long on this review, but I think that I gave you way too much information during our class on Wednesday, so a good review on what I want from you. I think it could be something good for you. So we looked at several definitions, several types of, sorry for the background noise, but we looked at the different origins of the term pidgin. According to Saint-Romain, it basically could come from Chinese corruptions of either the English or Portuguese word business or ocupação, or from the Hebrew word pidjam, that means exchange, or pidian from a South American Indian, or from the Chinese characters that I asked you to pronounce for me in the comment box, that mean paying money. So as you can see, even if you don't remember every single point, the argument is that the word pidgin comes from something that means exchange, business, trade. As for the theories of origin, according to the independent parallel development theory, we said that all pidgins and creoles developed independently, but they share a common linguistic ancestor. Okay, they all come from the Indo-European family. According to another theory, the nautical jargon theory, when European sailors used lingua franca, because of course every European state had its own language, so the European sailors used a lingua franca among them, but they passed this down to the African and Asian peoples when they went into contact with them. According to a third theory, the one of monogenesis and relexification, all the European pidgins and creoles derive from a proto-pidgin source. This means one language. That was a Portuguese pidgin, used during the 15th and 16th centuries. This pidgin, in turn, derived from an earlier lingua franca that was called Sabir, that was used by crusaders and traders during the Middle Ages. Okay, so basically, let's say that it all comes more or less from the Portuguese area. Finally, according to the baby talk theory, pidgins are close to baby talk. So they're very simplified. There's no morphological change, approximation of standard pronunciation. So pidgin equals baby talk. And finally, of course, there's a theory that synthesizes them all, that says that it's a little bit of everything, and that all of them are, all these theories are valid. And that was the end of class that we had on Wednesday. Now, moving on to 8.6. As you can see, we're almost done with the first part, okay, with the more theoretical part of the course. In this section, we're going to look at English as an international lingua franca, and especially why English is the world's primary lingua franca. Scholars have given several reasons for this. The first reason, of course, is historical. So why did English become the international lingua franca? Well, the reason for this, given from a historical point of view, is that each country that has adopted English uses English for its main institutions. Not only does it give it, well, what does this mean? That basically all the work they do is done in English. And so, as a consequence, as each of these countries uses English for their main institutions, historically, English has evolved into becoming the main lingua franca used around the world in communication between states. Now, let's look at the political reasons that could have given lead to, that could have made English the international lingua franca. There is an internal and an external explanation for this. In many cases, you have to consider that English is used in contexts where there are hundreds of different ethnic groups. This is the case of India, where English, for internal political reasons, has become a sort of neutral means of communication between several groups. Okay? It is the language that puts these groups together, that makes them that makes it possible to communicate. And then, of course, there are some external economic reasons. What does this mean? Of course, the United States of America have a dominant economic position around the world. In colonial times, it was Great Britain that had main power with its colonies. But nowadays, it is the United States of America that have a dominant economic position. And so if you want to trade with the United States, you have to speak their language. And that's what basically is the external political, but also economic reason for which English, whatever inner circle English, has become the dominant language as a lingua franca. Of course, there are also some practical reasons that go beyond politics, beyond economic reasons. You have to consider that English is used in several works, in several occupations. More specifically, that English is the language of international air traffic control. It is used not only for airplanes, not only for air traffic, but also at sea, in the maritime field for policing and emergency services. The language that is used around the world in these common practices is English. Okay? And English as a lingua franca allows people from all countries, from all cultures to understand each other. Of course, we're not talking, if we look at it from a practical point of view, of course, not everybody who works in these fields speaks perfect inner circle English. However, actually, it's totally the opposite. However, what they do have is an extensive vocabulary that allows them to communicate and to get things done, basically. Very technical language, but still English. And then, intellectual reasons. If you think about the economic world, the academic world, most of the scientific, technological, and academic information is expressed through English. You are someone if you publish in English at an international level. So in these communities, in these discourse communities, English is the main means of communication. If you don't use it, you're out. Okay? So English is the lingua franca in intellectual fields. And now something closer to you. Of course, English has become the international lingua franca also for entertainment reasons. Think about the power that English has when it gets to your ears through music. Of course, there are some people who listen to Italian music only, and that's okay. But if you look at it at an international level, the language that is used the most all around the world is, of course, English. And then, personal advantage, prestige. You have to consider that a person who speaks in English is perceived as having a higher status. Remember about all the videos that we've watched about people saying things like broken English, improper English, you are more respected if you speak proper English. Okay? That's what this part, the personal advantage, prestige part, is all about. At the end of this class, I will give you a video about this that makes you understand more what this personal advantage thing is about. Well, giving a definition about ELF. According to your book, ELF is any use of English among speakers of different first languages for whom English is a communicative medium of choice and often the only option. And that's what basically English as a lingua franca is. You use it when your hearer does not understand your language, you do not speak the hearer's language, and so the only way, the only option that you have is to use a language that both of you know. And that's how lingua francas are born. Okay. Now, as for the next section, A7, English in Asia and Europe. In this section, we're going to look at some similarities and differences between languages that are in English that is spoken in these two countries, in these two continents, sorry. You have to consider that Europe is considered part of the expanding circle because, remember Cashru's diagram, Cashru's scheme about inner, outer, and expanding circles. In Europe, there is an increasing number of people who are learning and using English as their second foreign language. The problem about this is that, well, actually the debate is whether these new varieties of English should follow or reject British or American English norms. But let's get more deeper into the varieties of English spoken in Asia. And Europe. The problem with English that is used in these two areas is that we have to sort of establish a status for these Englishes. And this is especially important at a formal educational level because we have to establish how we teach, what is taught, and how we should test you, okay? Remember what I told you about, okay, so if I say if I was instead of if I were, are you going to correct me? Is that okay? Should I use that? Should that be considered a mistake or not? Okay, so that is what scholars are trying to understand. Cashru defines these varieties of English as linguistic orphans in search of their parents. Okay. Linguistic orphans in search of their parents. What does this mean? That these new Englishes do not know if they should totally comply with what their parents, the inner circle Englishes, tell them to do, through their norms, of course, or they should be something else. They should be something different. The problem behind this is that non-native Englishes are still considered deficient, as if they were lacking something. Okay? And again, I repeat my position. I'm not saying this is correct or incorrect. What linguists do is just describe the state of things. And then, of course, each of us has their own position, their own idea. And that is what I invite you to do. Okay? And I am going to ask you this question. So be ready for it. Again, I'm not going to say that it's right or wrong. I want to know your personal opinion about how we should consider these varieties of English and your own variety of English. Let me get into something more specific about Asian languages. Okay, several scholars have divided Asian Englishes according to several criteria. Some scholars divide them geographically into 3 groups. Of course, I'm not going to ask you to tell me the varieties of English that belong to each group. Of course, I'm not that crazy. But what I want you to know is that there's South Asian varieties, like India, that we will look at together, or Sri Lanka. Southeast Asian and Pacific varieties, like the Fiji Islands or Malaysia, the Philippines. And then East Asian varieties, like China, Hong Kong, Korea, and so on. An easier classification is done by scholars who divide Asian Englishes depending on their use. So there's institutionalized Englishes. This means that this is the second circle, the outer circle. This means that English is used within their institutions. It's taught at school, it's the language of communication at school, it's the language of the government. And this includes cases like Brunei, the Fijis, India, Pakistan, and so on. And then there's a second group of Englishes in Asia where English is not institutionalized. They belong to the expanding circle. Okay, so people who are learning English on their own, that it's not the language of government, it's not the language used at school. And this is cases like China, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, and so on. Sorry for the okay. Apologize for the background music, but I hope you enjoy it. So I was saying something that I already explained. We can follow this second classification that divides Asian Englishes between institutionalized and non-institutionalized. Okay? Generally speaking, when we're talking about institutionalized English, it's the outer circle, where English is used in government, school, and other fields. Non-institutionalized, where it is used in the expanding circle, so it is not used in the government or at school and institutions in general. Within the Asian areas, India and Lankan Englishes are the most developed. However, there is little information for areas like Bhutan, the Maldives, and Nepal. Let's say that most of the studies concerning English used in the Asian area where it is used as a second language concern India and Sri Lanka. We'll look at this more into detail. In India, English serves a unifying role. What does this mean? That there are several languages, several mother tongues, and English is used as the shared language of communication. English allows these populations to communicate. Okay? And so it has a sort of unifying or neutral role in communication. Indian English has developed its own phonological, syntactic, lexical, and discursive features. Okay, so we should consider this when we are discussing whether Indian English should be considered an English variety of its own. And then the opposite case is Lankan English, English spoken in Sri Lanka. In this case, English is not used. It does not have a neutral role in communication. Actually, what it is a class marker. English is used among the educated and the rich. Okay. I left you this video here, video number 1, that gives you a comparison between Indian and Sri Lankans. You will notice from this video that there are not only some linguistic features, some linguistic differences, but actually cultural differences. You will see that this person criticizes because Sri Lankans are sometimes not recognized as a people of their own. They are usually assimilated with Indians, but the differences are definitely a lot. And this person, despite not being an expert, gives you an idea of how these two populations are different and how they use English in a different way. So please pause this video and go to link number 1. To give you an idea of where we are in the world, this is the map of India. You can see it better from your slides. But anyway, just to give you an idea, this is India, and this little island over here, this is Sri Lanka. Okay? So south of India. I will not get into Brunei for today because it's a different area. I don't want to get you confused. But remember what I was saying about prestige, about English as being a language of prestige. I'm going to put this video over here. It is a TED Talk. The second link for today, only 2, promised. And I will put it right here so that you can follow along. Okay, it's a little off topic because you should have watched it in the middle of the class, but it's okay. It's definitely longer, so it's okay to watch it at the end of the class. And it is about cross-cultural communication. Remember what we said, that there's a problem with English and other countries about considering English a language of prestige, the language that should be taken seriously. This video is a TED Talk by Riccardo Pellegrino, and he analyzes cultural differences around the world. He is a little bit of a mix between the Italian culture, Riccardo Pellegrino, of course, he's Italian, the Norwegian culture, and the French culture. So please watch this video, and it's going to give you a good idea of how people are taken seriously or not seriously, depending on their accent. Not only for this, because then the video gets into several concepts like respecting rules and how people queue, fanno la fila, how several cultures respect or not respect rules. So please pause this video now and see you back in 20 minutes. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and that gave you some insight into what it means to belong or not belong to a language that is considered a prestige language. So what did we do today? We looked at the purpose of English as a lingua franca. We said that there are several reasons that have led English to becoming the primary lingua franca around the world. Historical reasons, okay, because it has been used in main institutions of lots of countries. Political reasons, because it was used as a means of communication between different ethnic groups. Economic reasons, due to the United States' dominance around the world from an economic point of view, and not only. Practical reasons and intellectual reasons, because English is used in fields such as international traffic control, in the technological and academic fields, and for emergency situations. It has become a lingua franca also because of entertainment. Music, lots of music is in English. We discussed the topic of personal advantage or prestige. Speaking English is an extra mark, especially speaking it with an inner circle accent. And finally, I introduced the topic of English used in Asia and in Europe, and so how it is used in the expanding circle, not only of Europe, but also of Asia. And how these Englishes are considered linguistic orphans in search of their parents, meaning that they don't feel that they belong to the inner circle, but still they want to be defined. They do not want to be considered deficient anymore. They want to have that sense of belonging, or at least being defined as an English on their own. We started the topic of Asian Englishes. There are some scholars that divide them by regions: South Asian, Southeast Asian, and East Asian varieties. Or easier for us, because it depends on Kashrew's classification, institutionalized or non-institutionalized Englishes. So basically those that belong to the outer or expanding circle, depending on Kashrew's classification. And more specifically for today, we focused on the differences between English spoken in India or in Sri Lanka. The main difference is that in India, it is used with a unifying role, okay? It is the shared language of communication between across several cultures, several languages. But this does not happen in Sri Lanka, where it tends to be more a class marker. It is the language of the educated and the rich. So as for today, we watched 2 videos, one about the difference between Indians and Sri Lankans, and then the one by Riccardo Pellegrino about English as a language of prestige. Okay, so the song that we're going to listen to for today is over here. And it's Say It Right by Nelly Furtado. And so I'll read the lyrics. In the day, in the night, say it right, say it all. You either stand or you fall. When your will is broken, when it slips from your hand, when there's no time for joking, there's a hole in the plan. Oh, you don't mean nothing at all to me. I can't say that I'm not lost and at fault. I can't say that I don't love the light and the dark. I can't say that I don't know I'm alive. And all of what I feel I could show you tonight. You don't mean nothing at all to me. From my hands I can give you something that I made. From my mouth I could sing you another brick that I laid. From my body I could show you a place God knows. You should know the space is holy. Do you really want to go? And then it repeats. You'll find the link here. And in the comment box, if you have any questions, comments about the class, please write them in the comment box below or send me an email. Remember what I told you about your mother tongue teacher's link. I will confirm this or not. I will confirm this or not during tomorrow's class. Thank you for watching and have a nice day. Bye.